My name is Chelsea Aiudi. We currently live in Bedford, Massachusetts, just about 30 minutes outside of Boston. I graduated from URI in 2015, and a couple of reasons why I chose URI. The first and foremost was the 06 program. So I was looking at other programs that you had to reapply after the first 2 years, and I liked that URI, once you were in, you were in. And then the other piece was I came from a small town. I grew up in central Massachusetts, and I liked that URI had a nice campus feel. It wasn't in a big city because I wasn't really ready for that step yet. So it just had a very homey vibe. Denise Gorinsky was in orientation, and you know, she acts like a mother hen. So I think that was also something that drew me to the program, is it felt like a family.
And I'm Anthony Aiudi. Pleasure to meet everyone, and thanks for listening to us today. Similar to Chelsea, I'm from Rhode Island, actually, so from Woonsocket. So I think part of that was obviously being from Rhode Island made URI an easy choice. But beyond what Chelsea said, I think for me, you know, URI was a nice balance between a larger, you know, state university, so having the resources available to that. But the pharmacy program also being small enough where it did still feel, you know, somewhat like a family, and you had more of that individualized experience rather than being part of a 30,000 person university. So I think the balance between the two of that really was attractive when I was looking at different schools of pharmacy.
Awesome. Great. I totally agree with like everything you guys said. Denise is awesome, and it is great that it is like such a big school too, so like you have opportunities like within the College of Pharmacy and like outside of the College of Pharmacy too, which is like really awesome. So you could get involved in like so many different ways. And so my first question for you guys is just what your current roles are for each of you.
Yeah, sure. So as of just a month ago, so this is very new, I became Associate Director of Global Disease State and Product Training. I work at Takeda Oncology, a pharmaceutical company that's based in Cambridge, but it's a global company. Previous to that, I was working in medical information.
And I guess I'm rather non-traditional pharmacy role. So I currently work at a venture capital firm. So my job is pretty much looking for investment opportunities in the life sciences, as well as starting up new companies to help take you know, a researcher's idea into becoming a potential therapeutic or diagnostic for patients with different and various diseases. And prior to that, I spent about 5 years in clinical research, so running clinical trials to work towards getting drugs, again, developed for various diseases, from infectious disease to different rare metabolic diseases.
Awesome. Those are both really interesting paths. So then would you both be able to tell me a little about how you got there, if there was anything in particular that made you interested there, if any of you did like a fellowship or any other degrees or certifications you guys might have? Sorry, that was such a loaded question, but.
No, sure.
Sure. So I actually kind of came in a non-traditional way into industry. Right out of pharmacy school, I had an offer with Target Pharmacy. This was prior to CVS, actually, so it was just with Target. And I really liked the retail experience. And I worked after graduation for about 6 or 7 months, you know, as a grad intern into when I got licensed and became a pharmacist. And once I was actually in that role, I realized there were some things that I felt were missing as far as like career satisfaction and that sort of thing. I wanted a job that every day was a little bit different rather than being the same routine, and to have some more opportunities to advance my own knowledge. So always needing to be up to speed on research and kind of keeping a pulse on that. I felt like I was losing that already working in retail. So I ended up getting an entry-level position in medical information at a company in Cambridge called Aiudi Pharmaceuticals. And it was a medical information. So I had a few rotations that kind of touched on medical information. I worked at CVS Corporate and for a drug information API rotation, which kind of gave me a touch of that. And wasn't really familiar enough about fellowships, or I don't even know if IPHO existed. Yeah, it wasn't well established at URI when we were there, so I didn't really have this awareness of fellowship prior. So I was thankfully able to get in without one. And I really felt like medical information was a good fit for me. I worked in medical information at bouncing around at a few different companies. There was some acquisitions. So I ended up at larger companies, went back to small companies, but was in medical information for about 5.5 years. And then just recently, I was interested in exploring another area of medical affairs. So the disease state and product training still sits within medical affairs at a company, but rather the focus of answering medical questions that come from healthcare providers or patients. I'm creating training materials that then our medical science liaisons or medical directors in different countries use so that they can become proficient on our data and feel very comfortable going out and speaking with healthcare providers about our data. So that's what my current role is. Again, I'm really new into it, but I'm excited to learn a different aspect of medical affairs. And then you also mentioned different certifications or degrees. So one thing that I pursued, which is relatively new in the industry, is board certification in medical affairs. So I did that about 3 years ago when I was working at a company. Because I hadn't done a fellowship, I wanted to, expand my horizons a little bit and learn some more. So got that certification back in 2018, which I think was helpful for, accelerating my career a little bit. I think I answered everything.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I didn't even know that existed. I know you could be board certified in different specialty areas of pharmacy, like oncology and other things like that. But I didn't realize there was one for fellowships too. So that's actually really cool.
Yeah, it's relatively new, but a lot of people are it's becoming more and more popular. So I was kind of at the beginning of it, but I've been a mentor to other graduates of the BC MAS program. So I think it's a good thing to be aware of and look into if people are interested.
And they have similar programs for that for different areas in industry, like, regulatory has RAC, I think it is RAC, so Regulatory Affairs Association or something like that. So, they definitely are trying to create that standard so there's consistency across the industry of kind of a baseline knowledge. And especially because I think a lot of what happens in industry, unfortunately isn't taught. You can't really cover that in pharmacy school. There's so much to learn already, and unless it was an 8-10 year program, you may not be able to get there. So I think it is great to kind of create that more of a governing body to oversee kind of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And then for myself, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's such a different area of pharmacy too. So I love hearing all the different details about things and learning things like that, because I feel we don't always get to learn so much about industry. So hearing what you guys do and stuff like that, I think it's so awesome. So yeah, now your turn. How'd you get there and everything like that?
Sure. So maybe I did a little more traditional. So I did a postdoc fellowship. So I did it at Northeastern University in clinical research. So that's, again, really designing, running clinical trials, working with the FDA, with many different areas at a pharmaceutical company to run trials to answer that particular scientific question. If a drug works, is it safe in patients, which will ultimately lead to the approval of drugs for certain diseases or patient populations. So it was through Northeastern, but at a company called Cubist Pharmaceuticals. So they make, at the time they were making daptomycin was their big product called Cubicin. So it was supposed to be a 2-year fellowship. About 6 months into the fellowship, we were actually going to mid-year, which is, as I think most people know, is where, you will interview for fellowships. We flew down on Sunday and the stock, something happened Sunday night. We're like, what's happening? And Monday morning, the markets opened up and the company was bought by Merck. So my fellowship was cut 18 months short, and had the option actually to continue a fellowship with Merck down in New Jersey, or just become an employee of Merck. And so I took the latter, did the kind of the same role, but got a full salary, which was nice. But I stayed with Merck for a little over a year, continuing doing clinical research. I was responsible for running pediatric trials, so kind of jumped into really challenging trials of how to run infectious disease trials in newborns. But it was a really, great experience. And from my time there, was really able to see trials everywhere from, we even took a new molecule first time in humans, which is a huge milestone for a company. Was able to see kind of the first in human all the way to that, the pediatric trials were global phase 3 trials, and then even post-marketing trials to support label expansion. But I stayed there for about, again, a total of 18 months between Cubist and Merck. And, I think what was a great experience for me was, Cubist was about 1,000 people. So it was kind of a mid-sized company. Merck was about 80,000 people, a very large size pharmaceutical company. And I quickly learned that just wasn't for me. And so I was actually pulled to a startup company called Stealth Biotherapeutics, and for clinical research again. And so for the next 4 years, I spent time taking a product really from, again, first in human all the way up to a global phase 3 trial in rare mitochondrial diseases. And so, really a fascinating journey there in terms of, talking to the FDA. And especially, we look now in the controversy of, the FDA with Aduhelm. It was the same people that are being quoted. Those are the people that I was in a room with talking with about this product. So it's really, really interesting just how small of a world it really is. But then in late 2019, unfortunately, our phase 3 trial wasn't successful. And so at that time, I was kind of looking to move on, and that was really the catalyst for it. But the venture capital firm that actually started Stealth Biotherapeutics, I was able to use my network and be able to interview and to have discussions with them about potentially joining their team. And so for the past a little over 18 months, I've been part of Morningside Ventures, which is a global life science venture capital firm. So again, we invest across the spectrum of life sciences. So not just therapeutics, but we do devices, we do diagnostics, we're into cell therapy, into immuno-oncology products. So again, going to what Chelsea said, kind of really expanding the knowledge from the solid foundation from the pharmacy degree, but then every day is continuing to learn more. And so my role there is both looking at novel science and kind of weighing the merits of the trials that they've run or the data that they've collected. But then it's also thinking about how we make that investment. How much do we want to invest? How much is the company worth when we invest? What kind of control do we want over the company, and how do we help to form it into becoming a successful company and product? So to help me with those skills, part of what additional, education or credentials do I have? I did an MBA when I was also at Uri. So I think the business degree obviously helps when in some of these conversations and activities that I'm involved with now. But then when I was doing the fellowship, I also got a master's in finance. And so that really helps, I think, with some of the discussions I have as we start talking more about the numbers than we do about the science. And so, I think the combination of those three, along with my experience in a small company, really, because you really wear, many different hats, have really helped to prepare me for as much as I can be prepared for the job that I do today.
Wow, that's awesome. Did you do the joint MBA Pharm.D?
I did, yeah, yep.
Right,
so
you
it
did
was.
it while you were in pharmacy school too.
I
Okay.
did, correct.
Okay. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, maybe? I know, that's something really cool. I don't know how much it's changed from then to now, but that might be something cool too.
Yeah, sure.
I have
No, absolutely. So yeah, I think it's a great, I wouldn't say it's a perk because it's a lot of work, but it's a great opportunity, I think. If you have the means to do it, I was able to, kind of double dip credits, take some of the electives to count as the business courses. But for 2 years, I was traveling up to Providence, 2 nights a week. And so it's definitely a large commitment to make it happen. But, if finances and time allows, I think it's a great opportunity. On the flip side, just to be fair and balanced here is, I think that there's also value in waiting. As I've gotten, along in my career, I think that there's things that I wish I knew when I was doing the MBA that I just had no clue from being an intern or working at a community hospital. Just it's a lot different than once you get to do something full time and it becomes your career. So I think there's pros and cons to both doing it early, just to get out of the way, and again, develop that solid foundation. But I think there's also benefits to waiting. So I don't think there's a right answer. I think there's an answer and everyone can make their own. But I don't think having even if you don't do an MBA, having just business courses and you know, taking economics, taking accounting, it helps with your personal life. It helps with, you know, everyone has to realize once you come to work, whether you're a community and industry, you're going to be managing a budget, you're going to be managing people, and those are all, you know, skills and knowledge that you can learn from taking business courses.
That's so true. And I also love how you guys both touched on like lifelong learning with like what you're doing right now. I know they always like stress that to us like while we're in school and talk about how pharmacy, like, you know, how we all have to do like CEs and everything like that. So I feel like you get to see that like every single day, which is like really cool that you guys get that, like, I feel like very like future forward kind of aspect of pharmacy. So like you're seeing things that are potentially going to be approved like down the line in a few years. So I think that's really cool that you guys are doing stuff like that.
And that's one of the, in industry, actually, what's nice is a lot of the activities in industry, there's conferences, obviously, you know, mid-year is one of them, but there's ASCO, there's ASH, these oncology conferences, there's ID week for infectious disease. Pretty much every disease space has a conference, and often those conferences can be your CEs, which is great. So you can really double dip both learning for the company, but then also for yourself to meet those requirements you have for your license.
Awesome. That's really cool. I didn't know that either. You guys are teaching me so much today.
Yeah, it's one of the perks. I mean, travel can be exhausting for business, but it's nice to see new places, meet new people, especially when I'm working with a global company, to meet global colleagues that work in different countries and seeing the perspectives of sometimes the drugs might have different labels in different countries, and getting that perspective from a global level is really nice, and something that you don't always get, especially if it's a company that's just US based. So I've enjoyed that at the companies that I've worked at that are global.
That's really cool too. So my next question, you guys both kind of touched on this a little bit, but how would you describe like a day in the life, like in your current positions, and like maybe like some of your like key responsibilities and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So with my new position in product training, my main responsibilities are to evaluate what are the training needs for our medical employees. And then once we figure out what the needs are, what is the best way to assess how we train them. So some examples of platforms or things that we would use for training would be creating an infographic. It could be creating a slide deck that then has a recorded commentary from a medical director to add a little bit more perspective about what's important. It could also be creating interactive modules where someone would go in and kind of click around and see some different hypothetical scenarios and answer questions to make sure that they not only acquire the knowledge, but they can apply that knowledge in different situations that they might experience when they're having conversations out in the field. And then the next level would be an in-person training. Sometimes we call them boot camps. In the past, they've done some creative solutions like an escape room or like Shark Tank model, just something to really engage participants so that they're learning, but doing it in a fun way. And as we mentioned, those conferences that we can go to are good opportunities to have these in-person trainings, because we just put a couple days before the conference when everyone's already in one place at one time. Obviously had to pivot and do a lot of things virtually this past year, which has given us some good skills and ways to implement these trainings without necessarily needing everyone to travel for the future. So a day in the life is attending some of these strategic meetings for the different products that I work on, so I can see what clinical trials are coming up. Are we maybe looking into new indications that we might need to train on? Were there updates to treatment guidelines that we need to make people aware of, or for drugs that are still investigational and are going to be launching at some point, figuring out like a very rigorous onboarding curriculum so that they're going to be up to speed and ready to talk about the data when things are launched. So that's my perspective on training. I don't know if medical information would also be helpful, since I had some experience in that, so I can just kind of give a quick overview of that. So for medical information, the kind of bread and butter task of medical information is answering these questions that come in from healthcare providers or patients or caregivers about our drugs. At my companies, we've contracted with a call center, so I'm not necessarily answering the phones, although sometimes at certain companies you would be doing that. So the call center will escalate questions that are really complex to us so that we can do PubMed searches or look into our clinical study reports or ask subject matter experts to get the answers to them. And then we also create a library of documents that the call center can reference that answer those frequently asked questions that we know we get really often and we have data on. So we create these medical information documents that the call center can speak to. And so in addition to that medical information, because you're the drug expert often at a company, you sometimes get pulled into medical review. So a lot of roles that I've had have been a mix of medical information and medical review. And I've reviewed medical content. So that is created by like the training team. Like now that I'm creating materials, medical information has to review it, or medical communications, creating slide decks that medical science liaisons use in the field. You're reviewing them for accuracy, making sure references are appropriate and up to date, making sure there's appropriate context outside of what's already pulled in, if there's other information that's necessary to really get the full picture. And then also promotional reviews. So those materials created by the marketing team. So it could be journal ads, commercials, or different, like if you're at a conference and there's a banner on a taxi or a banner in the airport, all of that has to get reviewed by medical, legal, and regulatory. So it's an interesting perspective to be able to review both non-promotional and promotional materials. So in my medical information days, I did a little bit of both of those too.
That's so cool. I love like drug information stuff. So I think having like being able to do like PubMed searches and look up stuff like that, I feel like is also like just a really good skill to have in general as a pharmacist. So that's such like an awesome role, it sounds like. And your current role sounds really cool too. So you get more of like a hands-on role with like making those trainings and things like that. That sounds awesome. And how about you, Anthony?
Yeah, and I think it's so in the same manner, I'll talk about both clinical research and then what I do in venture. So from clinical research, I think the point that you were making up about, being able to find the data that you need, right? PubMed searches, et cetera. That is so important, I think, in everything that we do, both, and for me, clinical research and now in my role at a venture capital firm. In clinical research, a day in the life, it really kind of the demand on the job kind of ebbs and flows depending on where you are in either designing a trial, setting up the trial, running the trial, closing it out, analyzing the data and then reporting it out. And so it really varies on, and I want to say how much you work and also, how much you're using your brain. So when you're designing the trial, you have to, go talk with, a vast amount of experts in the space to understand, what's the patient population you're trying to study. You also have to talk with regulators, the FDA, the EMA in Europe, and other, regulatory bodies throughout the world to say, okay, what do they want to see to actually get a drug approved, and from both safety and efficacy. So then you work with an internal team, cross-functional, both the scientists and the medics that are will actually oversee the trial, but also with the regulatory team, with the manufacturing team to make sure you can actually have drug that can come, to be part of your trial, it gets labeled appropriately. And so then once the trial gets, you go to kick off a trial and you have to have these investigator meetings throughout the world. And so you have to go travel, which is, part of the fun, I think, of what we've done is go travel and train these physicians on how to run the trial. And then, as the trial is actually being conducted globally, you have to keep an eye on the data that's coming in. And so, being able to look at trends in data to see if there's potential safety signals, and then being really the front line to field questions from these physicians that are running the trial, and when they call in the middle of the night and say, I have a patient whose blood pressure is, 170, over 120, what do I do? You have to be able to know how to triage that to the appropriate medical staff to support that. And then once the data comes in, being able to analyze it, understand what that data says, and then how do you tell that story of what the data actually tells? And so that's something that also I think is really important aspect of the job, is being able to know how to interpret data and understand what implications that has in the real world. And so that's when you would then go back to the regulators and say, here's what our data shows. What do you think? How else should we design? What should the next trial look like? Or is this enough to actually, get the drug approved? And then, part of my role, and this is right when I left Stealth, was actually, working on filing a new drug application. So an NDA, which is, what's required to get the drug approved. And, that's an application that is hundreds of thousands of pages of paper. So it's a really large application. And so it's, being able to, again, put that story together and work cross-functionally across, many different people at the organization to really get that drug across the line. So, getting a drug approved, and that happened when I was at Cubist, it really is quite an exciting time at a company. I think that you see, 10, 12 years of work that all comes down to one decision by a regulator. And once it gets approved, now you're at the next stage of that product's life, but it's a really exciting time for a company. So definitely a great experience. So then going to venture, so what I do now, and even that, maybe I'll, bucket it into maybe 3 activities. And so the first is really, staying up to date on new science, and then actually seeing that science. And so, every day I spend a good portion reading, reading different news outlets to see, either Endpoints News, Stat, these different, news outlets that what's happening in biotech, just to keep up with, who else is investing in these companies, but what other science is making it into the clinic, and what's that data look like. And then along with that is, when someone has a really great idea, they'll actually come to us and they'll pitch that idea to us. And, I don't want to, it's like Shark Tank, right? So they come and, instead of, showing us some peanut butter or whatever the other companies come up, they're showing us data from animal studies or from human studies of what their molecule can do. And then we have to evaluate that and decide if we believe the story. We dive really deep into the data and try to understand it. Going back to looking up literature, right? We go to look at what others are doing. What do others' data look like? And so that's maybe one bucket. The second bucket is again, once we decide to make an investment, is actually kind of the business behind that. And so part of my role is I'm on the boards of some of our companies, so help to kind of set the long-term strategy for these companies and make the high-level decisions that will help guide that company to hopefully have successful products. And then I think that the third, and this isn't as normal, but I run one of our portfolio companies. And so actually, being able to see the whole plan and actually operationalizing it and going to run those animal studies, going to run those human studies, that's a really interesting management opportunity and definitely a learning from my end. And, I think that takes up most of my time, I would say, probably about 50% of my time. But it definitely is for rewarding because, again, you go to the Mercks of the world and you see a small sliver of what the whole organization looks like. And now what I'm doing, I see the whole organization. It's a much smaller organization, but, really interesting to see all the different functional areas and aspects and how they all kind of integrate with each other. And I think that anyone going into industry, that's something to really consider is where, based on your personality, what's the right fit for you in terms of the size of the organization. I have some friends that, they love doing clinical research. And so they continue to work at Merck and they love their little piece of the pie there. And then I have others that want to see the bigger picture, I don't want to say the bigger picture, but see, wear more hats and see different areas in industry. And, they love being at these small biotech companies. And sometimes it's a happy medium in the middle. And so it's really, and I think that it's hard to know what you want until you get into industry and experience it and decide what works for you. But I think that that's one of the beauties of pharmacy and what we do, which is the skills are so transferable that, you can start in medical affairs and then make it to training. You can start in clinical research and go to regulatory. You can, maybe you can go to CMC and manufacturing. I haven't seen as many people do that, but, it's definitely, the skills that we learn, I think, are easily transferable.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway because I think people in school might stress about what they want to do their fellowship in. And I think it's just important to realize that that's a way to open the door, but it's not like you're making a commitment to a medical information fellowship and therefore your next 40 years are going to be in medical information. So I think that although it's good to narrow it down and get an idea of what you want to do, especially these fellowships that you can rotate through different areas so that you can get more experiences. It's not set in stone that that's what you're going to have to do for the rest of your career.
And maybe the last thing that I'll add now too is, also there's non-traditional routes into industry. So, I did the fellowship and that was my route. Chelsea didn't do a fellowship and that was her route. But there's, just if you don't get a fellowship, right, that's a highly competitive process. Not that getting a job in industry isn't, it absolutely is, but just because, you get hit down once doesn't mean you don't get back up. And I think that you can easily get back up and find the opportunity to make it into industry. In my class year, I never said I graduated in 2014, but in my class year, I know I have some colleagues now that weren't in industry, didn't get the fellowship, didn't do, or some did a residency, then came over to industry, right? There's 1,000 paths of how you can get to industry. And so really it's each person, it just goes down to, how bad do you want to, what's the will that you have to get into industry, and you'll find a way to get there.
Yeah, I feel like I have talked to a few other different people about industry too, who currently work in industry. And I feel like everybody has such like a different path. Mm-hmm. And just because like one person does one path, like does a fellowship, like doesn't necessarily mean that like everybody else is going to do a fellowship too. Like, I feel like it's very like person based, and like a lot of like networking too, I feel like plays a role, like meeting different people and just trying for a bunch of different things. And I feel like it's so like everybody's like so different, and there's so many different roles in industry. Like there's not just like a one size fits all. Like I feel like from both of like your previous and current roles are like some things like I've heard of, but then some things I've like never even knew that pharmacists could do, which is like such a cool opportunity. And like I would have never known otherwise. Like I feel like there's so many doors for pharmacists, especially in industry, that you like don't even know exist until you actually put yourself out there and do some exploring. And like even like talking to people like you who currently have these roles, like I would have never known, like I said, that these existed if I never got to talk to both of you. So that's so awesome.
And maybe another thing that I'll add just is, I think that you have APPEs and IPPEs, right? And I know myself, right? I worked at CVS, I worked at Fatima Hospital, like, great jobs, and I'm glad that I did them. But if you're really set on industry, right, there's internships out there in the summer that, being in Rhode Island, it's a little more challenging, but especially if you live in New Jersey, you live in New York, you live in Massachusetts, or if you don't, you can spend 3 months and get this internship that, you can really help identify kind of where you want to go in industry, but also get some experiences because, at the end of the day, when you're interviewing at mid-year, what separates you from the others, the other, 500,000 students that are interviewing, and some of those early experiences. And I know that's something that, I didn't appreciate when I was earlier in my pharmacy career, but is, jobs are great, but sometimes, getting even an unpaid internship that gives you an experience, it pays for itself multiple times over by the doors that it opens. I know someone that graduated the year before me who I'm still close with, that's exactly what he did. And, 3 years in a row, he worked as an intern at a pharmaceutical company, and he didn't do a fellowship, but he got a job right after college, just because he was a known entity there and he already had some experience. So, keeping that in mind is there's definitely non-traditional summer jobs or internships during school to consider. And maybe waiting for APPEs, is great to get the opportunity in APPEs. But I remember when I did APPEs, I think there were 1 or 2 industry rotations, period. That's probably expanded since then, but so not everyone was able to get that opportunity that wanted to. So really going out there, being proactive and seeking out that opportunity on your own is definitely something that, I would recommend, because I think it really does, it opens your eyes to what's out there, and it definitely starts to develop that network, which is so important.
Totally agree with what you said, especially like getting that early exposure, like being able to like see these things like as like a P1 or like a P2 before you even start like your APPEs. Like I feel like that's so important too, because then even if it is something you don't like, then like it's something like that you don't want to go into that like specific field, or like like early on versus like later on during your APPEs, or like when you're applying for fellowships, like you kind of have a sense more. Obviously you don't need to know what you want to do like right away, but I feel like it also kind of helps you like develop a sense of like what you want and like what you don't want, whether you like enjoy your time there or not. Like I feel like regardless, every experience, no matter what, is like super like a great way to like get your foot in the door and like learn what you want. So that's so awesome. Yep. Totally agree with what you said. And then, so I have two more questions left. So I have one, you might have kind of answered this too. So like what your favorite parts of your current jobs are.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it, but I guess I'll highlight it again. I think one of my favorite parts of the job is the global collaboration. I think that it's really expanded my horizons as far as how even healthcare works in different countries, and understanding the different intricacies and what is valuable to one country versus another country, and being able to interact with employees that come from all of these different cultures. That's been something that's been unique to this role, and I was able to do it at medical information as well, for traveling to different conferences and meeting people that way. I think specific to my current role, something that I have recognized and was the reason I wanted to explore it further and I'm looking forward to is the creative aspect to it. I think it has that clinical application of like knowing the data and being an expert on it, so you know how to train on it, but doing these different creative modules and workshops and working with vendors who are experts on that, and kind of learning good ways of facilitation and good ways of presenting data in unique ways. That creative aspect is something that I hadn't had in medical information as much. So I'm looking forward to that as I work more in this role.
And then for myself, I think that first bucket I was talking about, which is, seeing these pitches from really smart people, it's humbling, to know how smart some of these PhDs, physicians, pharmacists that we see are. 2 weeks ago, I had dinner with, the gentleman who invented the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So it's like, sitting there just listening to his story of how they came up with that technology, especially during COVID. Our firm, we invest in some of the vaccine opportunities. So seeing, kind of being at the front line of that was really exciting. But again, every day seeing these pitches, we're on the cutting edge of science, and it's really exciting to see that. And honestly, every day I have to go look up physiology and understand, like, how does that cell do this? And, so it's always learning, but I think it's really fun to keep seeing this new science as, continue to your point, every day is an opportunity to learn. And so definitely, that's the exciting part of the job.
That's so cool. I can't believe that's such like a once in a lifetime kind of like opportunity too, especially like right now with everything going on. So that's so awesome. And then my last question is just, how did URI prepare you for this role? I know, Anthony, you said you got like your MBA and then you got your master's in finance. But for the both of you, like just maybe any classes or any like experiences you might have had?
Yeah, so I think from a classes perspective, obviously for medical information, the DIAL course with Dr. Ward for drug information, just learning the best approach for how to systematically evaluate literature in that class is something that is extremely important, is basically the foundation of a career in medical information. I also think that I've bounced around to different companies, and I've always worked in oncology, but I've worked in different tumor types. So done lung cancer, ovarian cancer, hematology. It's amazing how much I can recall from our disease state pathophys classes. And so I think that learning how to learn at URI, if that makes sense, so that you can really quickly understand something that maybe you've never seen before, and be able to have a little journal club on your own, so to speak, to figure out if it's for medical information, if it was a question on using our drug in this off-label indication, a random tumor type I've never understood, I am able to learn enough about that tumor type, read about the data to formulate a response. So I think that that's something that URI really equipped me to do, is evaluate literature and then just learn how to effectively learn.
No, I agree there. And, I think some of the courses that we all, dread, statistics, things like that, I think that those are important courses. I think that, especially with what we do, which is, you have to let the data drive the decisions and how you feel about a drug. And especially, again, going back to COVID right now, we had family members that were, questioning to get the vaccine or not. And all you have to do is show them the data, and it kind of speaks for itself. So I think that, those courses, which again, aren't that fun, but they are very important. And those are concepts that will, they kind of, again, they cross all different aspects of pharmacy and especially industry. But, beyond classes, I think, and again, going back to why URI, I think that, again, URI Pharmacy is a smaller college inside the university. But every day, both of us, we interact with others, we manage others. And so I think there's a lot of things outside the College of Pharmacy that should be taken advantage of. Both of us were part of the Student Alumni Association. That's just one organization. Again, not maybe a plug for SAA, but if not others, feel free to join. But, we had leadership opportunities there. We spent time at oozball or at different Rhode rallies. And it was about talking with people. It was about how do you influence others so you as a collective can do more. And I think that those experiences outside of the College of Pharmacy doesn't take away from the College of Pharmacy, but really supplements it. I think are really key as you mature as a professional, as an individual outside of the university. I think that those are really helpful and at least in myself, kind of learning some of those skills that really those soft skills that you can't learn in a class.
I agree. And we were both also orientation leaders for multiple summers. I was a URI 101 mentor, and I think all of those experiences really helped me to be more comfortable public speaking, more comfortable with conflict resolution. And URI 101 mentors, you have freshmen coming in with issues and trying to problem solve all of that. Same with orientation. So I agree, the soft skills that we learned and some of those extracurricular activities are things you didn't realize that you were developing because they were fun things that you were doing because you enjoyed them, but experiences that have helped us in our careers.
That's so true. And I love that you guys said that too, because I'm a leadership minor. So I've done like a lot of things with that, a lot of like team building, a lot of like communication, things like that. So, and when I took it, like obviously the classes I took weren't like pharmacy specific, but I feel like what I learned from that, I like can definitely apply like going forward, like in the future, like as a pharmacist, and just like applying all the different skills that I've learned and just talking to people. I feel like it's such like a big part of pharmacy, regardless of what like field you go down. I feel like it's such like universal skills, like you guys both said. So that's really awesome. And that's so cool. I didn't know you guys are orientation leaders and URI 101 mentors. And I read your bios. You guys said that you were in Student Alumni Association, which was so cool. I played oozball my freshman year. So it was a great event before COVID. So
yeah, I don't know if they still do it, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know, like because of COVID, I don't think they did it, but before COVID, I know they were doing it. But so thank you guys so much again for setting aside the time to talk to me. It was great hearing all about what you guys do. And if you had any last words, then feel free.
Well, I think that I know I mentioned that from picking a fellowship perspective, you don't have to stick with what you're doing, but I think my perspective of starting in retail and then going into industry is another thing I just want to highlight. Like it seems like a lot of pressure to choose a job right out of pharmacy school, but I think that this portal that Dr. Estes and you all are putting together is great to explore different avenues and just to know that you can explore multiple avenues throughout your career.
Yeah, and maybe two things that I'll add, which is don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. I think a lot of, it's a great career, community pharmacy, and that's, a lot of us had experiences of that in college. But, don't be afraid to try something that, you might not be as familiar with or comfortable with. And, it may take a little more work to develop those skills. But again, you only have one life, so, make the most of it. And then, I think the second is, work will always be there. And so it's always important to balance, I think, the work you do along, with the joys in life. And so I think that, that's part of the reason why I think we both enjoy both being in industry is our schedules are very well aligned. So we have weekends off together. And I know when we first started, Chelsea was working weekends and I had weekends off. And, and it's a minor thing, but, it definitely, you need to balance that quality of life with whatever job you take. And so every job has trade-offs between, those two. So maybe those are my final parting words.